Again, appreciate you all taking the time today. This subject matter is pertinent in our life today, and we're trying our best to make sure that we can help you protect yourselves and your businesses. So with that, I would like to introduce Kim Knies. She is a cybersecurity specialist and with one of our partners. And I'm excited to hear from her today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Great, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay, see the screen okay. I'm really excited to be here. I'm so glad to see so many attendees on the webinar, and very excited to talk to you today about cybersecurity and ways to protect your company, your employees, and your customers. And I'm hoping that you find this conversation certainly helpful, but also timely and relevant, and that you're able to take away some insights and tips to help keep your business safe. Look, we've all seen stories about data breaches and cyber incidents. It seems like anytime you turn on the news or scan the headlines, there's always a story about the latest company that got breached, how it affected millions of users and included all kinds of personal data. I mean, numbers that will just kind of blow your mind, and all that data that's now out on the dark web. We've seen some very prominent and well-known and successful companies get wrapped up in these breach stories, and the numbers of users affected seem to grow and increase with every new incident. I think these headlines have become so prevalent and almost so normalized that I'm afraid we've become somewhat immune and don't really think about what this information can mean and the damage it can cause. We've become detached from the stories and the threats and the potential impacts, or we don't know what to do about it, and so we do nothing. But I think we're at a point where we simply have to confront it head on by answering some important questions that I'd like to kind of pose here. So things like, what does it mean when our data, our company's data, our employees' data is on the dark web? Why should that matter? And how can it affect a business? How does the data get on the dark web, and what happens to it once it's there? And then finally, what does the dark web even look like? We all hear about it, but it's none of us have, or probably most of us have not seen it. So what does it even look like? So during our time together, I'd like to open a conversation around these questions. I'd like to focus on the current landscape of cybersecurity as it's impacting small to medium-sized businesses. But I'd also like to take away maybe some of that mystique of the dark web and pull back the curtain a bit and walk you through some screenshots of marketplaces on the dark web where cyber criminals are buying and selling stolen data, as well as some of the methods they're using to steal our data. But to start out, I wanted to give you an idea of how these breaches are happening, which ties into this idea that it can often be employees that are the greatest threat to a company's security. So here's an overview of the different ways that breaches occur. It may be no surprise that the top offender here is phishing scams. They have come a really long way in sophistication. As you know, in a phishing attack, criminals send fake emails that appear to be sent from a legitimate company and that asks victims to provide some sort of sensitive information, usually through a link that looks like it will go to the company's website. But that website, of course, is actually a really clever fake, and the information you provide, those compromised credentials, go straight to the criminals behind the scam, who will then use those details to commit fraud or sell them on the dark web for a profit. Super low tech, but highly effective. The second most prevalent way that breaches can happen is, again, through compromised credentials or stolen credentials. In this case, we're not quite sure of the method. We just know that it involved some compromised credentials. And we see some other methods here as well. Ransomware attacks use malicious software or malware that's designed to prevent access to a computer system or data until a ransom is paid. Ransomware is typically spread through those phishing emails or visits to an infected website. and it can be absolutely devastating to an organization. You may remember, for instance, the aptly named WannaCry ransomware attack from 2017, which targeted computers running Windows by encrypting that data and demanding ransom payments. Microsoft was pretty good in their response. They released some emergency patches within just a few days, but the attack is estimated to have affected more than 200,000 computers across 150 countries. So it really was kind of a widespread global attack with damages estimated between hundreds of millions to possibly billions of dollars. So just I think underscores the effect that a ransomware attack can have and how it can impact individuals as well as organizations. Other breaches are a result of things like hacking, gaining unauthorized access into a network, or through brute force attacks. Those are those trial and error methods where an attacker systematically tests possible passwords until they get a hit. Although we see several different ways that these breaches happen, what I'd like to emphasize here is that the majority of these involve credentials being stolen, right? This, I think, is important for us to acknowledge, and we have to think about the impact those stolen credentials can have on our organization, because a single compromised credential could result in a breach, stolen data, ransomware attack, which we've talked about. It all points back to those stolen credentials. And whether through a phishing attack or a brute force attack, or employees clicking on emails that they shouldn't, or perhaps downloading an attachment that has malware, all of that starts at the human level. So as we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, I think we need to acknowledge that it's skewed towards human error. This is essential for us to understand so that we can empower our employees to become more aware, more vigilant, and really understand the impact of what stolen credentials can mean to an organization. And I think we have to help them understand that it's not as simple as just changing a single password on a single site, but it's more of a pattern, right? It's more about a culture. It's about having internal policies in place, but it's also about training team members to play that vital role in a company's overall security. So let's talk about that overall security through the lens of what's referred to as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is this acknowledgement and acceptance that everybody has been compromised. That, for instance, if we ran a dark web scan for all of the attendees on this webinar, every person on here would likely have something pop up. I've run a scan on myself, and definitely have found some just bad information out there on me. And this is the assumption that everybody has been compromised. Maybe the severity of the exposed data would vary, but zero trust is this idea that we should operate under the assumption that we've all been compromised. Because once we've accepted that, we can shift our focus to access management. That is making sure that the right people have the right secure access to the right machines with the right privileges. And at the same time, absolutely keeping an eye outward and making sure that we're monitoring those for those compromised credentials and external threats as well. This framework really lets us manage that individual access to make sure that we don't have team members that are accessing the network where and when they shouldn't, or maybe logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or having privileges to sensitive data or applications that are well beyond what's needed for their particular job. Establishing this cybersecurity framework really allows us to identify and address any gaps. But beyond that, this zero trust allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws as well, which dictate how we approach security and access management. Because here's the thing, compliance and privacy laws are no longer optional. We're seeing compliance regulations make their way around the world, and they're everywhere now. It, of course, started with the GDPR in Europe, which was the first entry into making compliance mandatory, and now it's here in every state. California and New York have certainly set the bar pretty high here in the States, requiring even small businesses to have insights into what their employees are doing, as well as when and how they're reporting breaches. So cybersecurity and compliance is no longer a nice to have. It's absolutely mandatory and something that businesses are required to do. So we've been talking about exposed credentials, what that can mean for a company, but I wanted to take just a moment and talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. I think here's a great visual to help us understand how real and broad the risk can be. We're looking at 9 different key functional areas of a business, from HR and payroll to email services to the CRM, all the way through e-commerce, banking and finance, and so on. As you look through here, I'd like you to think of all of the places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions, right? All of those places where they're creating accounts, they're using their work email address and creating a password. I think sometimes we can be really great at addressing any internal threats on the network, but we cannot ignore all of these third-party sites where employees are creating logins. We have to think about those external sites and threats, and I think in doing so, we kind of have to ask some pretty tough questions, right? We have to think about that human behavior piece and ask ourselves, are we confident that employees are creating unique and hard to crack passwords for every single site that they're using? Can we be sure they're not recycling passwords, or just as works, just as bad, adding that token character or two at the end and thinking it's all good? I know I was guilty of that for a while there, because this is where that data on the dark web can really come back to hurt a company. When these accounts are connected by similar emails and passwords, when users are using the same or a variation of the same login credentials across multiple sites, right? So let's say, for example, that I use Expedia to book my travel, and Expedia experiences a breach, and I'm using the same password on Office Depot, where I have an account with a corporate card on file to make purchases. Or what if I'm using that same password on the network? Once someone has a password to gain entry into your organization's network, they have the proverbial, keys to the castle, so to speak. You can, I think, see pretty easily how the potential for damage dramatically increases from a single compromised username and password. As an example, just a quick story here. I was talking to an IT provider last week who told me about a client of theirs who had just gone through something related to what we're talking about here. They had an employee who received an email that appeared to have been sent by DocuSign, something that they used quite regularly for contracts and agreements and such. The DocuSign email, of course, was a scam. It was a phishing scam, and the employee clicked the link in the email, entered his email and password. Using the same credentials he entered for DocuSign, the cyber criminal was able to access his account and send an email to their bank instructing them to wire $50,000 to an offshore account. Unfortunately, in this particular case, the bank didn't call to verify the request and wired that money, $50,000, right into the hands of a cyber criminal. This was a small organization. That's a big sum of money for anybody, but absolutely crippling for this particular organization. They had to get the FBI and the Treasury involved, and it was a very long, drawn-out affair. In the end, I'm happy to report that this particular organization did get their money back since the bank didn't follow protocol, but that was after a whole lot of time and stress and resources that were spent with this one incident. Or how about this story that a colleague came across last month, I believe. Through a dark web scan, a provider discovered dozens of passwords out on the dark web for a particular organization. And when reviewing with the client, the accounts payable person recognized one of the passwords from the old accounts payable person, the person who had the job prior to her, who had left the password on a sticky note behind that indicated that same password was used to log into the company's bank accounts. Well, right there at that meeting with the client, they took that password and logged right into the company's Wells Fargo account and found that the old accounts payable person still had an active account. Keep in mind that this particular employee had been fired more than 2 years prior. The kicker was that this bank account had access to more than $1 million in cash in all, as well as access to lines of credit. I think it's a pretty good thing that they tried that password that they found on the Wells Fargo account before a hacker did, right? Now, granted, this is a pretty extreme story, but we definitely, even when a person no longer works at a company, they may still have active accounts on third-party sites. We can be really good at offboarding and turning off permissions on internal sites, but sometimes we forget about all of those external sites that an employee has access to. So in that particular case, a dark web scan certainly helped that company identify a vulnerability and avoid some pretty major losses. But you can see how just a single exposed email and password can have this domino effect that leads to lost revenue, downtime, damaged reputation, a lot of potential for disaster when the bad guys get their hands on employee data. So we know that there's a thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials on the dark web. But we may not have a clear picture of exactly what the dark web looks like, right? How it operates, how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So I thought it might be helpful to share just some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed so that we can kind of get a good look at the dark web. So the dark web, of course, refers to that part of the internet that's intentionally hidden and is inaccessible through our standard web browsers and methods. But it actually operates very similar to what you and I experience when we're exploring and working on the internet. For example, there are job postings just like this one. In this case, as you can see, the dark overlord is hiring and he pays pretty well. For 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking, a cyber criminal can make a whopping $762,000 to start. Not too shabby, I'd say. But what I find so interesting in this case is that there's a probationary period, there are performance reviews, just like a legitimate company might put in place. And here's a snapshot from the dark web. Here, a criminal organization is offering up credit cards to buyers. I understand it's probably a little bit tough to read, but it's an advertisement for the total package, actual physical credit cards, complete with PINs, spending limits, everything that buyers would need to put these credit cards to use. And in this case, this company ships discreetly via FedEx, so your neighbors wouldn't even know what you're up to. Or how about this one? It's a big election year, right? But not even our voter registration information is safe. Check out this product here offering, it's offering personal data for 1.8 million Kansas voters, and it includes their names, addresses, dates of birth, and more. But don't worry, it's not just Kansas here. Here's the same offer across a lot of other states as well. And note these prices here, $10,000 plus is the asking price. I think that really underscores just how much money cyber criminals can make off of these credentials. And these are only the ones that we were able to fit on the slide here. Unfortunately, there were more states involved in this particular data dump. And speaking of data dumps, check out this one. This is a listing for the largest known data dump, it says, for just $10. It includes 2.7 billion records that contain email addresses and passwords. And again, kind of what I wanted to point out here, notice how these criminal operations are run quite similar to legitimate businesses, complete with ratings about responsiveness and product quality as well. And finally, a lot of us are using Zoom to meet and collaborate while we're working from home. We're even using it now for this webinar. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, lots of people turned to Zoom to connect. In fact, Zoom went from 10 million daily meeting participants in December to 300 million daily meeting participants in April. That is just a crazy increase in usage. And with that also comes concerns around Zoom security practices. One particular area of concern that you may have heard about is that new Zoom bombing phenomenon. That's where uninvited attendees crash and troll Zoom meetings with the sole intent of disrupting the meeting, often doing some pretty disturbing and troubling things. Well, in this case, hackers got a hold of a bunch of compromised Zoom accounts and posted them on the dark web so that those bad actors could get everything they need to bomb the meetings. A little bit later on in mid-April, a cybersecurity intelligence firm found more than 500,000 Zoom accounts for sale on the dark web, and those accounts were being sold for as little as less than a penny each. Quite a bargain, I guess. So in addition to kind of some snapshots of the dark web, I also wanted to touch on a couple of emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. One of the things that's a bit surprising is how sophisticated and turnkey some of these methodologies are, such as this new methodology we're seeing, this idea of ransomware as a service. For just a few $100 a month, cyber criminals can get a really nice branded platform such as this to log into. They can add in all of the contacts, all of the companies that they want to launch an attack against, and then all of the people that they'll send ransomware to. And there are even some pre-made templates ready to go. So they can just essentially sit back and monitor the attack through their dashboard, track who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. This whole ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize ransomware attacks for deployment on a large scale. And taking ransomware attacks a step further, we've also seen a trend where a ransomware attack can escalate to include extortion. It goes a little something like this. So the general consensus has been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, don't pay the ransom because it's likely that you're just not going to get your data back anyway. There's just no honor among thieves, I think is the saying. There's no guarantee that paying off the criminals will get your data back. But now cyber criminals are saying, okay, fine, if you don't pay the ransomware, I'm going to release your data on the dark web to make some money, and while I'm at it, destroy your business and its reputation. So it turns out that these ransomware incidents are also compounded to include data breaches. It's just yet another example of how cyber criminals are getting smarter and more sophisticated in the way that they're executing these attacks. And as we think about all of the ways that they can get their hooks into your business and cause all kinds of damage and chaos, I think it's a good time to kind of think about what would happen if your business suffered an attack like this, and whether you've got a solid business continuity plan in place to make sure that if disaster should strike, you're able to minimize that downtime and minimize the overall effects to your organization. And finally, I wanted to touch on phishing scams, since they're one of the easiest and yet most effective ways that bad actors can steal employee data. Phishing kits are available for purchase on the dark web, and they make it super easy for cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, to launch phishing campaigns. Pre-made phishing kits, such as what we're looking at here, include step-by-step instructions, as well as the website resources and tools that just need to be installed on the server. Then the attacker just sends out emails to potential victims, and if they don't have a list of targets, not to worry, they can buy mailing lists on the dark web as well. So as part of these phishing kits, legitimate websites are, of course, cloned, and the login page is changed to point to a credential stealing script. Emails are then sent with those links pointing them to the new spoofed website. Here is a side-by-side example of the actual Facebook landing page, and then the landing page included in one of these kits. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's nearly impossible to tell the difference. And hopefully you can see just how effective this is. I think most users, including me, probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They're getting that good. Or here's another example, just really quickly. This one is for eBay, and again, just as difficult to discern the real from the fake here. I think these examples really show why these kits can be so effective, and because they make it so simple and effortless to launch, it's a pretty compelling business proposition for bad actors who are looking to profit off of our stolen data. We see continued increases year over year in phishing scams, and it has picked up with even more so during the COVID pandemic, as noted here by the FBI, who warned businesses of that growing threat. The pandemic is this dream come true for criminals who really rely on deception and need to create a sense of urgency to achieve success with their phishing campaigns. So the past few months have really presented a huge opportunity to snag victims. During a crisis, we're more on edge. We're seeking out information and direction and guidance. It's a perfect time to capitalize on the uncertainty, the rapid changes, the overall disruption that I think makes us even more susceptible to things like phishing emails. Because we're so hungry for information and we're accessing information in different ways and at different times and on different devices than normal, and unfortunately, they know we're less likely to take the time to really examine a message and make good decisions about whether to open and click. So probably not surprisingly, we've seen a surge in COVID-related phishing scams as a result, and lots of them. Here's an example that we pulled that plays on our need to stay up to date on the latest news and developments. This particular message appears to come from the CDC, and it includes a link to a list of new cases in the area. I know we were all, at least I was, scrambling to figure out how many cases are in my area. I'm trying to make good decisions based off of that. This is playing on all of that fear and anxiety. We have called out some telltale signs that can help a user identify this as a scam: the fake email address, the generic greetings, some poor grammar. But I think these messages are timely and they're relevant, and for the distracted, maybe emotional and information-hungry user, very effective as well. But why limit phishing scams to just email, right? Cyber criminals have realized that they can also carry out these scams through text messages as well. We've always got our phones with us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. How easy is it to be caught off guard and see a new text message that we click on without really stopping to think about it? So phishing emails are getting increasingly sophisticated and tough to detect. But there are some steps that we can take to identify the scams. So we've all been focused these past several months on good hygiene. CDC is telling us to wash our hands for 20 seconds to decrease our risk of the coronavirus. But what if we applied that same hygiene to our email? What if we trained employees to take just 20 seconds to examine an email and look for those telltale signs? We know that there are things that we can look for to help weed out the scams from the legitimate emails. And here's a list of some of those things to look for. So first, we can see if the message includes that super generic content or maybe a broad impersonal greeting. We can look closely at the email address, particularly the domain. A lot of times it'll be off just a single letter or number, but that's all it takes to tip off that it's a scam. Consider if the message is trying to create that false sense of urgency. Maybe it's got some strong demands for actions as well. Look closely at the link before clicking. A really simple mouse over can tell us if the destination looks legit or if perhaps it's steering us into a trap. We can also put on our copy editor hat and look for those misspelled words, that incorrect grammar, maybe some weird messaging. And always make sure that a site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, think twice, maybe even 3 times before clicking on any attachments. Most computer viruses are spread through email attachments. So although an attachment may look important and urgent and enticing, it can also have malware that can cause a whole lot of damage. I think so often we can be in a rush and distracted when checking email, but if we and our employees take just that 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can save a lot of trouble and disaster down the road. IBT has lots of examples and resources that you can use to help educate your employees on what to look for. It's these kinds of resources, as well as that ongoing security awareness training, that can really help you change your employees' behavior, establish those good habits, and hopefully create a culture of security within your organization. We've focused a lot on the fact that our employees, while often our greatest asset, can also be the weakest link in security. And I'm not talking about that rogue or malicious employee. I'm talking about that well-meaning employee who clicks the bad link or opens the bad attachment or uses the same password over and over and over. We need to empower those employees to become that strongest link in security by training them to be vigilant and cautious. For example, we've talked about the prevalence and effectiveness of phishing scams. So I think it's essential that employees are able to spot that phishing scam. The best way to help them do that is through practice, such as phishing simulations, which are mock attacks that train employees to be vigilant and to be able to pick out those telltale signs we talked about, and to be able to identify phishing scams. It's a great way to address any gaps. And then deliver appropriate security training as well, which can increase awareness by covering those most important cybersecurity topics. In the end, an effective ongoing internal security awareness program can really help reduce your company's vulnerabilities by building what we refer to as that human firewall, which can turn employees into a really integral and important part of your company's cyber defenses. Because this doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. There are some serious threats out there that can cause some serious damage to your business. But if we are aware of those threats and if we take steps to increase security, we really can minimize the risks and help protect your business and your employees. Here are some tips to start moving in that direction. Some of these we've already touched on, thinking twice, maybe 3 times before clicking on links, looking closely at attachments. But I wanted to circle back on compliance. As we said, compliance is no longer optional, and businesses are required to take steps to protect data and privacy. But compliance regulations can be overwhelming and time-consuming and frustrating. You can lessen some of that stress and worry by automating compliance through a web portal system that can help keep track and organize everything. And we've talked quite a bit about the ramifications of exposed passwords. So it's incredibly important to help employees protect those passwords, both on the network and off, perhaps through a password manager. You can add an extra layer of security through two-factor authentication. Part of that zero trust framework that we discussed is ensuring that the right users have access, and two-factor authentication can help with that. There are some great solutions that really provide a balance between convenience and security. And also monitor the dark web. We covered a lot about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. Ongoing credential monitoring can really provide those critical early alerts that can help prevent a potential costly and widespread data breach. And then finally, and I would argue perhaps most importantly, bring in a team that you trust to help put together security strategies that will work best for your company. Really lean on them to provide the guidance and advice that'll help you stay on top of the changing and challenging threat landscape. I think certainly the team at IBT is fully prepared to help you figure out where you are today when it comes to security and put in place a plan in place to get you where you need and want to be. I know they're focused on keeping community businesses safe and thriving. So I know Eric has some things in particular to share with you today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Kim. That was really good information, and I love the fact that you actually specified even in Zoom, because we are using it right now. I do have a few questions that have come in, but a couple of things that I'll highlight as well. You said early on in your presentation that everybody, the zero trust, it's happened to everybody. I like to share. I'm very knowledgeable, been trained in a lot of this. I speak about cybersecurity quite often. We do these type of webinars, and it happens to me, right? I just this last week had my Uber account that I never use. All of a sudden, a new charge pops up, and I'm like, that's not me. So I had to go through and reset passwords and make it happen. You said about, I'm just going to share another statistic that I've heard and it just floors me, is since COVID-19 started, so February, there's been a 4,000% increase in phishing email attacks. Not 400, not 40, 4,000%.
Crazy.
So, and the bad actors are playing on fear and psychology. And I'll be the first to admit this too. This one happened a couple of years ago. We all get in a hurry. And then this happened to me. I was waiting on an invoice from a vendor, and I get an email from the vendor related to what we were working on, and I click on it. Fortunately, at the time, it was a known bad site. I get a big red screen that pops up and says it's a known bad site. I'm shaking my head because we have engineers and technicians that all now know that I clicked on the link, and I still get a hard time about that. But so it happens to everybody is what I'm trying to express there. So one of the questions that came across, how often do you check for stolen emails and passwords on the dark web?
That's a great question. So one of the solutions that we offer, that you offer, is dark web monitoring, and that is ongoing, continuous 24/7, 365 monitoring of the dark web. So that as soon as a new exposed credential, employee email address, and password is discovered, it's immediately reported to the portal. The provider is notified, and we're able to follow up and provide some suggested next steps. So it's ongoing and real-time reporting and alerting as new exposures are found on the dark web.
Another question that we got is, my employer was unable to attend the webinar. Will the information be available in a format that I can share with them? Absolutely. We will be sending up follow-up emails after this, just kind of as another housekeeping measure, so you all know. You should be seeing an email from me today. In that email, there'll be a link to my Calendly, where you can schedule a 15-minute call for me to review the dark web scan for your companies. And then tomorrow you should see a follow-up email come out that has links to the webinar. So those questions came in. One that I like, and I almost have myself, Kim, I'm curious what you think here. What do you think about DuckDuckGo? Have you been asked that question before?
I have not, no.
Okay, so I've seen where, and had some conversations, DuckDuckGo is like search engine instead of Google. And they block a lot of the ads and everything else from popping up. From what I've seen, yes, that is an additional way of being cautious on the web, not letting those things track. Another question that came across is, how do we monitor the dark web? That's actually why we're having this conversation today. With Kim, we are in partnership to do dark web monitoring for our clients. That's really powerful to have the information. And what's been surprising to me as we've looked at this is you can't do anything if you don't know what's out there. What this does is we're going to do a free web scan for everybody that's on the call, but the monitoring ongoing is going to look for your company credentials, any type of personal identification information. How it's structured is each domain. So for us, we have ibtsupport.com. If we have, ibtmarketing.com, anything else, those would be additional domains. So those would be an additional $25. Kim and her company also have the ability to do cybersecurity awareness training. A lot of companies have me come in and I'll do a lunch and learn or so forth. And I love doing them and I continue to do it, but those are on a once a year type basis. What I love about the cybersecurity awareness training is it sends out short, 2 to 5 minute videos on a weekly basis that people can digest, and it's constantly in front of them. So that's a part of what we can offer now too in training. That's normally a $250 setup fee and $100 for each one of those products. So we are offering to sign up for both of those by Monday. We'll get a 10% discount and waive the setup fee. So we want our clients to be protected. And a very simple thing that's happened, and we say it, I'll be the first one to tell everybody on this call, I cannot guarantee 100% security, and nobody can. But what this service to me, and I say it in this language, it's similar to a LifeLock for your business. You at least get alerted for it, you can know. We had a client that had their network credentials just, I think, 2 weeks ago. That's on this. They were one of our first clients on it. And it was the owner's credentials. And they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Well, it's quite simple. Let's change your password. Make sure that those credentials are no longer valid. There are additional measures that we're going through. I was really glad to hear you say multi-factor authentication, also known as two-factor authentication. And in our industry, we like to give those technical names, but what most people realize that they are in the real world is you're going to go log on to your credit card's website now. They're going to text you a 6-digit code that you have to type in as well. It's a second form of validation, right? Or authentication. That has been extremely beneficial on a corporate side of doing business as well. One other question that we had, and it kind of goes into that, is if I find out my employees have stolen information on the web, what do I do about it?
Contact your provider first and foremost. Make sure that they are aware, and I think able to provide that advice and guidance to minimize any potential vulnerabilities. Could be necessary to run a scan of the computer of the user and the network, or maybe some security checks may need to be completed. But beyond that, I think for the user, for the employee, as you mentioned, step one is change that password. And when I say change that password, I mean change it anywhere and everywhere where it's in use, and any variation of it. I know I mentioned I was guilty of it for the longest time. I just added the token 1 or exclamation point at the end of my password and thought I was really, really clever, but the hackers are on to us, right? And so that's not enough. So, really encourage, if and when an exposed credential is found, that user is sitting down, making a list of all of the websites where that password has ever been used, any variation of it, log into each and every one of those accounts and change that password. And then also, review those account settings, make sure that no information or anything has changed. Moving forward, that password needs to be killed, done, cannot be used again. So it cannot be used on any future sites or account creations. It's always also a good idea to maybe have the user contact the organization with the associated account, and if there's any kind of unusual activity whatsoever. And then, just a good advice to keep an eye on bank accounts, right? You should be checking them anyway, looking for suspicious activities, but certainly if there's any strange activity, report that immediately. And then kind of like what you said, I get it. When you tell a user, like, make a list of everywhere you use this password, and they say, how could I know? I have so many accounts. We get it. So that's where, considering that password manager and an MFA, a multi-factor authentication, could be really useful as well.
So I couldn't agree more. I actually use 2 different password safes. I love them. It takes some getting used to for most people. One of the things that I really like about it is it will also generate the password for you. So you don't have to sit there and think about it. Now, I have to know a master password, and I'm sure mine's about that long, but and you highlighted something else. We're going to be doing more webinars, and some of those are going to be around just business best practices. So I say, like you just said, if you're logging into your bank, most of them have the 2-factor authentication ability now. I carry on my smartphone an application that when I log onto the bank, I also have to enter that's generated randomly every 30 or 60 seconds. There are things like positive pay that you can set up on your bank accounts, which, only allows certain vendors to be paid. I'm not a financial expert by any means, but there are other things business best practice wise that we'll be continuing to talk about in our future webinars and so forth. I do want to mention we are going to have another webinar on July 23rd. It's going to add on top of this subject around cybersecurity training, what every employee needs to know about working from home, inside or outside the corporate network too. We've all dealt with that. I got to be honest, our team did a wonderful job reacting to a lot of businesses working from home, but there are new challenges about that. Not everybody has the same internet speeds at home, and the antivirus, if you're not providing them the machine, was it on their personal machine? So there's a lot of considerations, especially around the data and information that they're accessing for your business, and is it secure? So that's something else that we did want to highlight. Let you know we'll be sharing the registration in the follow-up emails as well. I don't see any other questions coming in. So if anybody else does have one, please submit it now. We'll wrap up in just a minute. I personally want to stress 2 things. One of the things that we've been working on internally is kind of a 15-point business checklist where you don't have to know all the technical jargon, but you can go through and say, where are my gaps that I need to address? Security assessments are going to be something that we're going to be talking an awful lot about, and I recommend doing those on a yearly basis. The other thing that Kim highlighted earlier on, we see it with companies in ransomware, your backup. The best recommendation that we have, when a ransomware attack hits your corporate network, is to go straight to the backups, the last known good backup. Because of the facts like Kim just said, once they've hacked your network, they've been in there. The cybersecurity training that I went through a couple of weeks ago, this other statistic scared me to death, because one of the facts that they said is a bad actor has been on a corporate network on average for over 120 days before the corporate network feels the impact of them being on there. And most people are floored by that. We did have one more question come in. Does this relate to malware? Once I clicked on another site that I thought was MapQuest, it was similar but infected my computer and we had big problems. That's going to be addressed differently. And I'd be happy to follow up on the call to kind of answer those concerns. The best way I'm going to answer this is 10, 15 years ago, we really only had 3 layers of security that we had to worry about. It was antivirus, your firewall, and then your authentication permissions on the network. We have now, like I said, that 15-point checklist, but I would say multiple layers. It's an onion of that. So we have regular antivirus, we have enhanced antivirus, we have malware, anti-malware, we have DNS filtering tools. So that's the one that saved me when I clicked on that link of, hey, we know this is a bad site, we're not going to allow it to happen. You have enhanced firewall security, and these are words like intrusion prevention and detection. We are offering additional enhanced security offerings on top of our existing packages. So I'd be happy to discuss that further with anybody after this call. There aren't any other questions. We want to be very respectful of everybody's time today. Appreciate you joining us. Again, hopefully this didn't scare you too much. Hopefully it's an education. And one last question that I get a lot that I will answer now is, no, I will not show anybody how to access the dark web. So with that, again, though, thank you everybody for your time, and please be on the lookout for follow-up emails from myself and our team on scheduling the review for the free web scan and for the webinar recordings. So we appreciate you. Everyone have a wonderful day.